putting the power of AI agents into the hands of these non-technical people is really powerful here because it can actually translate your business problem into the schema design and kind of the solution design for you. If we were to refound this company literally today, like how would this product feel? Like what are the experiences that we want people to have?
What are some skills that you're seeing enterprises or businesses in general having to learn as AI's coming in?
I think the most interesting one is to really understand the job to be done. So I think evals to me and prompt engineering are kind of like downstream of the job to be done, like framing of the problem. That is the real way to like unlock the right AI use cases. I think a lot of people try to do very simple, narrow things with AI. Like, I encourage people to like try the most bold, audacious thing you can throw at AI as you can, especially with the newest models. You will be surprised at how good it is. This thing already feels a little bit like AGI. In fact, like an expert, not just an average person doing this problem.
Howie, CEO and co-founder of Airtable, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have you here. Airtable at this point is used by something like 500,000 organizations all around the world. It's been around for a while. But for those listeners who might not have heard of Airtable before, can you please tell us what Airtable is and what it does?
Yeah, so we founded the company back in 2012, launched in 2015 as the world's easiest and powerful app builder, right? So I had worked at Salesforce, saw the power of the platform underneath their products. And really, you can abstract almost any application down to a database, logic layer, and interface customization. And that's effectively what we set out to build is like the world's easiest, much more disruptive version of that kind of an app platform that end users, like, people without technical training, without having to read a manual, could actually go in and build with, right? And so there's been a lot of different words to describe this category, like no code, low code. There's a bunch of different, kind of productivity, products that kind of look and feel similar. But I think our unique approach has always been having a really, really low floor, like very easy to get started using Airtable, and also a very high ceiling. So you can scale up and make it a production app, not just a way to kind of prototype or do simple, smaller app use cases.
Yeah, I know Airtable, again, we're going to talk about low code, no code, and it's, you can pretty much build an entire app at this point. But I think one of the most early popular use cases was around spreadsheets and databases, and I've seen the phrase spreadsheets on steroids. So I had a quick question around that. Is as we're with LLMs coming in, we're seeing Google and Microsoft trying to incorporate AI into their spreadsheets and so on. What do you think the future of spreadsheets look like? Do you think like the typical spreadsheet is like the dominant UI? Is that going to be the dominant UI going forward, or are we going to see things change a little bit?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is there's some really, really fundamental properties of a spreadsheet that I think are universal and kind of will always be valuable, right? So for one, it's just like a really clean and possibly like the most intuitive way to present data, right? I mean, literally, like you go back to grade school and like you lay out tables, right? Here's columns, here's rows. And it turns out, like a lot of spreadsheets are not used for number crunching where you have a bunch of crazy formulas and everything, but they're really kind of used as databases where you create a list of whether it could be companies or inventory or volunteers as nonprofit. And so for those types of use cases, I think this idea of like a tabular view will always be very, very important, right? I don't think that goes away with AI and agents. And in fact, I think it gets enhanced with AI. So for instance, the first capability with AI that we launched was basically that you could take fields and then output AI generated outputs in every single row of a really large database, right? So it could be customers, you could be generating customized messaging for each one. Now you can do web research and actually have basically an AI research agent, kind of like your own little like ChatGPT deep research agent going and running in every cell of an entire column that could go down like tens of thousands of rows, right?
Yeah. Same question around low code and no code apps. I mean, we've seen a few other, besides Airtable as well, we've seen other kind of UIs and UXs. Bubble, for example, is one that kind of comes top of mind. We've seen, Zapier and stuff. These things have a little bit of a steep learning curve for a lot of folks. Now with, a few apps, we're seeing this with Lovable, with Bolt. I know you guys have some new AI features around this as well. We'll talk about that in a second. Do you think the UI UX is going to shift towards chat increasingly, or do you think the debate is still open for what the future of no code and low code is going to look like?
Yeah, so it's a really big question. I think it's like literally $100 billion, maybe $1 trillion question, right? I think that's how much market cap hangs on the balance. And to me, it's not about either or; it's about both, right? I think you have to design for these hybrid product experiences where, on the one hand, there's a lot of value to the free form conversational chat, right? And the fact that you can just come in and like ask anything of AI. We launched our assistant just a few weeks ago. It's basically kind of like the Siri of Airtable, where you can just go in and ask any question about your data. You can have it build out your app, add a table, add a dashboard, etc. And it works really, really well. And yet, I think if you only have the chat input and output, if you can only kind of get the answers to your question in chat output rather than getting like a report in Airtable or switching to a filtered view, or to be able to go and like continue to modify the app, add fields, add table, and then visualize those outputs. I think chat alone would be too limiting an experience, right? Like you don't want to, be like viewing the entire world through just chat output, right? You would never go and like, imagine using other products. Like imagine using a game that's only, the only output is chat, right? Is text output. You wouldn't be getting the visual density and the interaction density of getting kind of a non-chat output. So I think it's really about both. And a lot of what we've been playing around with from a UX standpoint is how do you kind of interplay those concepts? So for instance, if you're an Airtable assistant now and you chat, hey, like, build me a dashboard of my top performing marketing campaigns, you don't want it to just output the answer in words. You want it to go and actually create the visual output that is very, kind of interactive. You can go and tweak it, etc.
I think like I remember like using Airtable, like I think first time around when I was building my first startup around 2016, and we really wanted to build like our own CRM and not really be on Salesforce or HubSpot, right? Because you were a scrappy pre-seed startup and like loved the interface, how simple it was. And I'm sure like the product has come like a long way since then. And now, like over the last 2 years, you've seen this like LLM wave, right? Like you have these models who can generate code, and you can, talk to you can generate some SQL code. You can use like, DBs and like do things with it. What I'm really curious about is, so I'm a developer, let's say, and I'm looking to launch something super simple, like maybe, we call this thin wrapper on GPT or something
Sure.
like that. How would I go about leveraging Airtable instead of, let's say, some other DB? Like maybe let's just talk about that one use case first.
Yeah, so we think of Airtable as, even though we started with kind of the data layer and the database product experience first, and that's one of the differences between us and other no-code products, right? You think of Zapier, it's all about the automations. It's kind of like the integration logic layer, right? You think about Bubble, it's really about the interface layer first, right? You go and you drag and drop how it's going to look. With Airtable, it was always about the data layer first, right? So you come in, you have a database that kind of looks like a spreadsheet, right? And kind of tongue in cheek, I call it like the world's best, kind of reincarnation of PHP MyAdmin, right? If you remember, like back in the day, you create a database, you create this like kind of GUI wrapper around it. But I think that's a really important distinction, because when you start with the data layer, it means that a lot of the other parts just kind of fall into place more naturally, right? So like you'll come in, if you're building a CRM in Airtable, you get your contacts into Airtable, right? Here's your customers, here's your lead list. And then you can start creating views, you can start creating automation logic on top of it. And I think what's really powerful about our approach versus, let's say, taking like a pure code gen approach, starting from scratch, and thing, even with AI augmented code gen, is you have a lot that's just kind of given to you for free out of the box, right? You have like your auth layer, your permissions model that's kind of bulletproof, right? Like there's no worrying about like, did I get it right in the code? And is there going to be a, kind of a data leak because, my code gen outputted the wrong thing and I didn't quite catch the error. You get a lot of the
byte coding's not messing things up.
Totally. And so while I think like a lot of the code gen is awesome, either as an augmentation of, your what you would have built already as a developer with handcrafted code, or as like a really rapid prototyping mechanism, I think for the genre that we're focused on, which is really kind of the internal business use cases, right? So CRM, as you mentioned, is one. Applicant tracking could be another. Tracking things like product roadmap, marketing campaigns, content production, like all of those are yet more. I think for those, what we give you is a lot out of the box that's bulletproof, right? Like the scalability of a data layer that's both really intuitive and easy to see and modify and understand, and now ask AI questions about, but also scale up, right? So there's this, new capability we launched end of last year called HyperDB. You can scale up to hundreds of millions of records now with Airtable. and you get these like, interface components built on top of it that, you don't have to go and do code gen to get like a really slick real-time collaborative interface on top of your data that works really well.
So is it fair to then say that, like, if I'm non-technical user, like code gen also is directly applicable to them, but they still need to, like, have some architecture perspective. They need to know like how to can like now build these products. It's not like you just start doing vibe coding like without any sense of architecture, you can build a product. In case of Airtable, as long as I'm a domain expert, let's say an HR person running the HR team, I can kind of go to Airtable and build my own kind of applicant tracking, interview tracking system or scoring system, just like have it like front end and back end ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I mean, one way to think about, I think, where we go in the next few years vis-a-vis like CodeGen is, I think CodeGen like makes developers like maybe 10x more productive, right? Like, I mean, if you know how to use these products, you can literally be 10x more productive as a developer, but you still have to be a professional developer, right? You have to be able to inspect the code outputs and, understand what's going on and have a little bit of like you said, like the technical architectural acumen to go and like say how you lay these things out, right? You don't want to entirely rely on just like, naive vibe coding that just completely falls apart, right? As you get to scale. I think what will happen and what we're doing is that non-technical people who want to go and build an app will also be 10x'd in their output, right? And this was already like the big advantage that no code has. Like if you were that HR person, if you're like a marketing person and you didn't know how to code, no code instantly gave you this ability to build real apps, right? Not just spreadsheets. And what I think, now we can do with AI is make your output even more impactful, right? Like 10xing the complexity of the apps that you can build, because now you can use our AI assistant to just talk to the app builder and it can help guide you along and like figure out like, oh, like you want to add a way to track campaign performance. The right way to model that is to add this table of performance and then link it over to the campaigns, right? So it can help you understand and teach you how to do kind of data modeling.
Kind of like nudging towards like an outcome.
Exactly. And so I think AI is really powerful here because it can actually translate your business problem into the schema design and kind of the solution design for you, right? And teach you along the way. And then also, we're giving these builders, these non-technical people, the ability to deploy AI into their what we call runtime of the use case, right? So it's not just AI to help them build the apps and then they deploy the apps and it just kind of runs like a normal app. But the apps that they build can now have AI running all the time to do work on their behalf, right? So it could be going out as an HR person and automatically looking at performance reviews, synthesizing insights, giving you like a recommended rating, et cetera, based on, your standards for performance, right, at the company.
So what would you say is the most interesting or surprising thing you've seen built maybe in the last 3 months with your most recent feature ad at Airtable, which you're like, holy shit, that's super exciting. Even for you, someone who's like, been at this company for 10 years, like built it from scratch and everything.
So quite candidly, I think it's really just how well the reasoning models work. And that's been a very recent phenomenon. I think a lot of people, I think a lot of lay people who just like play around with AI in a, just, more cursory capacity don't fully grasp yet that, we've had two major inflections in AI, really, I would say. The first was kind of the big first like ChatGPT moment where people realized, wow, these like LLMs are actually very good at generating word output, right? Like, and like they seem like they could kind of think, although in truth, if you really pushed and prodded them or tested them with like logical questions, they kind of fell apart a little bit. And so I think the first, big breakthrough was like, wow, like, for basically text generation and like, very, very advanced word association, but not true reasoning. These LLMs are surprisingly good. And there are all these cool parlor tricks that we can do with it, like the generate me a haiku on this topic with, in the tone of a sailor, right? What I think now is happening is that the models have gotten actually really good at reasoning. And there's this like inflection point where I think we've literally just in the past maybe few months with 3.7, Claude 3.7 from Anthropic to O3 from OpenAI, like we've actually just crossed the threshold where the models are good enough to actually reason about domain problems, like what we just talked about in the context of like app gen, right? And being a really smart assistant to help you translate your business problems into how to design that in the app and do it so consistently well that it's actually really useful, right? Versus more of a toy that like, when AutoGPT came out, like, a couple years ago, it was like a really cool toy, but nobody could actually use it for anything real, right? Because it was like just almost the glimmer of like what could be, but then it never actually worked in practice, right? And so I think we're just hitting that stride where agentic reasoning powered, reasoning model powered experiences are getting really good. And I think the ways that you can apply that to app building and also, kind of the reasoning workflows within your apps is really exciting.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about AI in the enterprise as well. Like enterprises at this point make, a big chunk of your user base as well as your revenue, I'm sure. What does it look like with enterprise adoption right now? Like, do you feel like it's going smoothly? I know that there's a big last mile problem right now. And like, what are some of the biggest like problems or barriers that you're seeing to AI being adopted in the enterprise right now?
Yeah, I have two big observations, and then I'll go into the details. The first is like there's really this polarization of like the AI enthusiasts and like AI early adopters in enterprise, and then the kind of AI laggards, right? And you saw it even from like the first couple years after ChatGPT came out. Like there were some enterprises whose posture was like, we got to lock this thing down. We got to block all these AI products. Got to make sure people don't use it because it's going to cause harm, etc. And then there were other companies that were more on the other side, which is, hey, like we realize this comes with some risk. We got to have some guardrails, but the stakes of not figuring it out and not experimenting and like, we can't just wait until somebody else comes up with like a perfect canned solution for us. Like we got to develop internal fluency around how to deploy AI. Like we got to lean in, that separation of the kind of early enthusiasts and the laggards has only continued, over the past few years. And so we see on the cutting edge side of things like, customers who have used Airtable to both do now like, very, very advanced AI app gen, but also to go and deploy AI into really powerful runtime use cases that are saving like literally like tens of thousands of hours of what would have been like, labor costs and having to hire more people when every company is under pressure to not go and expend a lot more. But things like being able to automate contract review or contract term extraction, right? So you could be a media company and you have all these artists rights contracts, right? Maybe you sign some musicians, you get the royalties on all their music, and to be able to go and like in mass extract out all of the key terms of all those contracts and then run workflows around them. So like saying like, hey, who are all the artists that we have who we have Spotify royalties for, right? Or who are all the artists that we have where we have the 360 like merchandise deal, and then run, kind of marketing or operations workflows around that. So, I think first point being like, there's some customers who are already at the cutting edge of finding all the places that they can actually get real returns with Airtable. The second is, I think there's this cold start problem. And so what we find is that like for many customers, they have some shallow use cases maybe, and sometimes it's like sanctioned, sometimes it's not sanctioned of like ChatGPT, of Copilot, et cetera. And that's great. Like I think it's good for employees to develop fluency just using any kind of AI product, period. But it's like they haven't found like a big win. They haven't gotten like real wins yet from like more meaningful and recurring use cases of AI, right? And so sometimes like there will be an IT-led project to go and like build something bespoke, maybe even like try to fine tune their own model and like build like a very complicated, kind of product internally to automate something with AI. But these things take like years, and by the time they're, they finish the V1, like it's already kind of obsolete because the models have changed so much. And so I think a lot of these companies are looking to get like that first few wins that kind of validate an approach and give them both the know-how and the confidence to start like rapidly picking off more use cases. And so one of the things we try to do when we partner with these enterprises is to go and like find just a few really fast, like literally we can deploy this and get you up and running within like weeks, at most months, so that you have some wins under your belt. You don't have to go and like build some custom code. You don't have to go and like fine tune a model. It just works. All you have to do is take the AI pieces that we give you in our Lego kit and deploy them towards your business problem. So it's more about like business problem framing and thinking about like, how do we want to deploy AI versus having to do complicated technical engineering to be able to go and get value out of AI. And once they get those first few wins, we find that they're kind of develops this huge momentum and excitement, and I think like internal confidence around how to go do it again.
Yeah. Follow-up question on that is, what are some skills that you're seeing enterprises or businesses in general having to learn. I think prompting is like the obvious one, whether you're in a technical, non-technical role, prompting is a big one. Evals are a big one, right? Again, technical, non-technical, you need to have some kind of eval around what's happening. But these kind of, I never heard the word eval 5 years ago, and I'm from a non-technical background, from a technical, so I'm sure like he heard it before. What are like, some of these new skills that enterprises and people are having to learn as AIs come in?
I think the most interesting one is to really understand the job to be done. So, are you familiar with like the JTPD framework? It's kind of like,
Yeah, yeah.
a spit. It's not just like the colloquial meaning of the word, but like there's a whole, kind of explicit framework that Clayton Christensen actually developed around this, which is, I think often we look at work as like the way that we do things right now. So currently, like the way that you do that contract management workflow in a media company is like very manual. And so if you define the work as like, well, first of all, I take every contract and I have a lawyer go and review it and look for these key terms. And every quarter we do that. And then, we go and reconcile all these costs. And like, if we want to reference like a specific artist, we have to go back and like look through their contract manually. Like, that's not the job to be done. Like, that's just the way that you're doing the job, like the way that you're actually executing on the job right now. But the real job to be done is like, what is the outcome that you're trying to drive, right? So you want to be able to more effectively and quickly go and run these operations, right? It could be like, kind of marketing operations. So, like which artists you have marketing rights for. It could be revenue operations. So, which artists you're going to pay what amount to, and not just once every quarter. Like, what if you could do it like in real time and always know like how much each artist is owed, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And so I think like being able to like define a process in a job to be done lens where you're not stuck in like how the work is being done, often very manually today. Because then you're already kind of like looking at it from a very narrow incremental standpoint, but instead stepping back and saying like, wow, like I could automate away this entire swath of work, right? So I think it's more problem framing. And then once you do that, I actually think the prompting, the evals best practices come into play, right? It's like, okay, now that I know what I want to do is to always be able to consistently extract out these terms from the contracts because I want to run these workflows. Now I know how to both prompt engineer to get that result from the AI and kind of give it the right input context. So like, hey, here's the contract, here's some instructions, and then you can define the evals really cleanly because you know what terms you're trying to extract out and why they need to be so accurate, right? You could say like, err on the side of false positive versus false negative here, because it would be a really bad thing if we accidentally marketed an artist that we don't have the rights to versus missed out on our opportunity to market them, right? So I think evals to me and prompt engineering are kind of like downstream of the job to be done, like framing of the problem that is the real way to like unlock the right the right AI use cases.
No, I think like you're like spot on, right? Like if you can't architect the business problem properly, like no matter how good you are, like knowing some AI, like you won't really be able to like put the right prompts in place. You won't really be able to put the right models, and then you won't be able to eval if you don't really know what problem you're like running. That's like
Totally.
spot on. And are you guys like
By the way, I'll plus one on on that and add something, which is I think also what I've seen is a lot of people don't give AI enough credit for how advanced and how human-like it can be, especially with the latest models, right? And so, I think a lot of people try to do very simple, narrow things with AI, like, hey, take like a bunch of investment research. Let's say you're a finance person, right? And you're looking at potential investments. And let's take all of these analyst reports and earnings calls and like all this research, and let's just use AI to do something very simple, like tag this as positive or negative, right? Which obviously it can do, but that's kind of like missing. That you could have done some simple version of that with like pre-LLM AI, right? Like some sentiment analysis has existed with much more primitive techniques. But what you can now do is like say, no. I'm actually going to skip ahead like 20 steps and not just like tag it as positive or negative, but actually have the AI go and take each piece of research and not only summarize it and extract out key points, but actually give you an investment recommendation from it, right? Like that's almost like skipping ahead to like what a human would have normally done as the final step. And so I think, one thing that like is really powerful is like, instead of starting with like incremental, testing of AI for like a small, almost like dumb task, I encourage people to like try the most like bold, audacious thing you can throw at AI as you can, especially with the newest models, right? Like you try O3, you try 3.7 Sonnet, like you try like really advanced stuff, and you will be surprised at how good it is, right? Like in some sense, like people are saying like, wow, this thing already feels a little bit like AGI. In fact, like an expert, not just an average person doing this
Yeah,
problem.
like it's pretty good at like a lot of
Yeah,
things, like especially
yeah,
the thinking models, right? Like I've gotten really good.
totally.
So so how like one thing I'm very curious about, right? Like you're built through like the cloud wave and now you're building through the AI wave, right? Like how do you see the differences? Like what are maybe three things you as a founder are doing differently, which you were not doing before in this AI wave, like which has helped you build a better company, like get more productive, or even just like improve your whole organization?
I think it's just super exciting. Like I've always thought of myself as somebody who likes to take really powerful new disruptive technological capabilities in the kind of the collaboration breakout era of like 2012 through 2015 when we were founded. That was like real-time collaboration technologies, that was like browser-based applications that were really robust. It's no accident that Airtable and Figma and Miro and other companies like that all started like literally in the same few years, right? In fact, Figma and Airtable have like almost identically parallel timelines. Founded in 2012, both spent 3 years building the product, launched in 2015, saw kind of PLG growth from there. And I think that's because like we were very early in seeing this growing trend of behavior of users. Like people wanted to have more like effortless collaboration in their product experiences. That was able to disrupt like kind of the prior paradigm, and like getting to play with new technologies like Node and kind of React wasn't around when we first started. We had our own kind of rolled version of something similar, but just like be able to leverage front end technologies like WebGL, et cetera, that could accelerate the rendering of really rich client side experiences. That felt like the equivalent of AI today, where now you can get to use all these new models that are coming out at this breakneck speed and figure out how to productize them into like delightfully high utility new experiences, right? So to me, it's just like a really exciting time where you go through these like kind of inflections and then plateaus in technology, where in the inflection, like it seems like the world is your oyster. There's all these new products and experiences that you can build, and then it kind of goes into optimization mode. And how do you just like scale up what you had? I find it really exciting that it feels like now we get to reinvent what Airtable is in the AI era, right? Meaning, like we have to think really ambitiously about like not just building incremental AI, but saying like if we were to refound this company literally today, right? Like how would this product feel? Like what are the experiences that we want people to have? And part of that is like coming in and having that hybrid approach of conversational AI to build apps while also being able to visualize what it generates as an output in no code components that are very easily understandable and editable by a non-technical person. It also means though, like putting the power of AI agents into the hands of these non-technical people who can now deploy them into real use cases, and even using AI to suggest how they can use AI in their workflows, right? Super meta. But to me, it's like, it's really opened up this new frontier of like, what I would call like UX or like HCI thinking, which is, I think it's kind of too lazy to say, what, everything's just going to be chat, right? And so like we don't have to think about UX anymore. Everything's just chat. Like I think that's a lazy cop out answer. And I think the real answer is like now the onus is on us to invent the new design patterns for having, AI that's really smart, agentic AI that can do all these tasks. But then also you want to have some output visualization and the ability to interact with or manipulate, what it's doing. So I think, there's lots of products that are going and figuring out what that new kind of HCI UX pattern looks like. I think the code gen products have explored some really interesting things around like, if you're in Replit Agent, for instance, and you're building stuff with chat, the fact that you can visualize the full stack, kind of development environment on the right side, see the previews, et cetera. I think that's a really cool, way of interacting with apps. And so likewise, we're looking at how do you go and like invent the new interaction paradigms for this new era.
No, I think like the AI is changing so fast. Like that makes a lot of sense. Like one more question on my end is,
Yeah.
what are the top three AI products you use on the daily basis? Maybe in your work, maybe personally. Just like love like like a quick name, one liner on them, and why you prefer using that one.
So first off, like, I mean, ChatGPT, Claude are like literally not even just like daily active usage for me, but like minute active usage, right? Like no joke. And I think it's, partly because I want to dog food the latest models and the latest capabilities. Like, as OpenAI adds like new capabilities like image gen, I want to play around with it because then we can also think about how to productize it into Airtable. So like with image gen in particular, it's like, wow, like this is awesome. The quality of these images are amazing. Now let's figure out how to like productize that into a scalable, parallelized workflow in Airtable. So we just launched something based on that API as a launch partner where you can actually generate images at scale for a marketing campaign rather than having to go in and do it one at a time, right? And the image quality is amazing, and you can prompt engineer it to generate different types of like creative output, right? So those two for starters. I've personally been playing a lot with the code-based app gen products. So like V0, Bolt, Lovable, Replit Agent. And I think they each kind of have their own